Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Cruz.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl Ames.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Joshua Dudley. I'm Dudley Joshua on Twitter and Instagram. I'm an entertainment writer, big fan of podcasts and independent wrestling, and happy to be on the Break It Down show today.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, we got Phil sitting right seat with me. He just jumped in, so it's always good to have Phil around. And I wanted to introduce the world to Joshua Dudley because he's a cool dude. You write for a major publication, and I thought we would not necessarily worry about what that is, but talk about what you've been hearing in the podcast space, because it's really easy to be pointed, and the folks that listen to this show maybe don't understand all of the different things going on, and we're always curious about the next great thing and what's interesting. Plus, also independent wrestling. Yes, please. We want to talk about that too. So, hey, thanks for coming on the show. Give us an idea of your background a little bit, and we'll go from there.
Oh, geez, Pete, this is we only got 45 minutes. Come on. All right, I'll make it real quick. But if I give you the whole background, it'll be too tangential. We'll be here for hours. But
right.
Anyway, basically, I always wanted to be an actor and a writer. Moved to New York many years ago to do that, and turns out I had Crohn's disease, and that really slowed my life down for a long time. Had to declare bankruptcy, moved back home. I wrote a great essay about that. That's now on my Medium page because the original website, it was down. Stopped hosting it. And then I've used that downtime to turn myself into a freelance entertainment writer for the past 3 years, and done pretty well. Written for the New York Observer, Real Clear Life, wrote a bunch of essays for literary magazines and a couple other places that I'm not at liberty to discuss because they don't want their name on the air.
It is funny that's a thing, but it absolutely is a thing, and you got to respect the brand, trying to protect what their brand is. So, yeah, we won't worry about that. But let's definitely talk about becoming an entertainment writer, because that is. So we always talk about with younger folks. We do our best out here, at least to my end, to try to mentor young kids. And when you say, "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" They've maybe got 15 jobs. I used to be 11. I think it's 15 now. But it's nurse, engineer, firefighter, cop. I'm running out of things to say. Maybe a teacher. And all of a sudden you run out of things. For sure, entertainment writer isn't the top of anyone's list. They might want to be a writer, but that's like not saying anything. So what is the landscape like for an entertainment writer? There are so many different things you can talk about, but how does one create an audience doing that?
The landscape is changing all the time. A lot of the bigger companies, their staff writers are joining unions, and other places are folding up, like with Gawker Media and everything. They're folding up, getting bought by bigger companies. Or like the Los Angeles Times, they fired most of their staff and brought on new ownership. So it's quickly changing, but it's a great time to be a freelancer. However, you're not making a lot of money, so it's kind of like the pay-to-play industry right now.
And then when you find a topic or a podcast or whatever it is that you want to write about, what is it about that thing? I mean, it's easy to write about cereal because everybody knows about it, but what strikes me about your stories is you typically don't go that route. So what is it that stands out for you in general? It doesn't have to be podcast related, but what stands out when you try to record something? Write something.
I mean, like anybody else, I guess, I look for things that grab my attention. I've never been I actually haven't listened to Serial. I'm sure I should, but I've never been much of a top 40 guy in anything, the real popular stuff. But I guess I like the independent stuff because it's you feel more community based. Like, you could, you're not going to be able to talk to Tom Hanks online, but like the stars and writers of almost any serial fiction podcast online right now. You can be part of a pretty active community on Twitter. with the creators, because most of them aren't big names, even if they do have a big platform. So that's fun. I mean, I look for in serial fiction, I look for interesting story hooks, because since you're not limited by budget in the sense that you have massive special effects, to do, since it's all audio, sky's the limit. So if the sky is the limit, then your story should, have no limit to it also. And that's the kind of stories I look for to write about.
Yeah, and there's also the luxury of you're the editor, you're the publisher. So if you want to talk about some very specific topic, you don't have to pitch someone else. You just have to do the work. And that might be that is a huge task. But you don't, like, if you want to talk about 1940s era comic books, your editor at whatever publication or broadcast company is not going to go, who the hell cares about that? Like, you actually can take and create an idea. And then one of the things we've had Tony Toast on the show. He wrote for Longmire and he's writing this next season of The Terror. And he was talking about how a lot of shows start off like true crime. There's any number of true crime based shows that were podcasts that, hey, we want to turn this into something bigger. And so it's an idea that you probably couldn't pitch to somebody else, successfully, but you can go out and make it and then let that show be the pitch for a higher order of production.
Yeah, the true crime shows that start as podcasts are getting pretty big right now. I just finished listening to the whole run of Gladiator, about the Aaron Hernandez story.
Yeah,
man, that really broke me. I don't know if you got to hear that one, but that's some powerful storytelling right there, man.
Yeah, I haven't had that. So I put out 5 podcasts of my own creation with different co-hosts and whatnot, but also I produce podcasts for other people. So my ability to listen to other stuff is very limited, but I want to understand that story, because I want to understand the impacts of brain trauma and how it ties to crime, because you have all these different people that, like Chris Henry, it's like, why is this guy so crazy? Why is he, and then it finds out like his brain is just, riddled with CTE at an early age. And it's just like, well, I can kind of understand questionable decisions because, his brain's not working right. It's not fully, capable. So when you talk about these things, it's, why not have a podcast to try to start to tell these stories individually? I'm looking forward to hearing it. I also started listening to Unplugged History, because everybody's, I like history and I like to hear from professors and whatnot. So that's another area where I don't need it to be, Dan Carlin does a great job, but I don't need it to be his top line show. I want a specific topic that stands out to me. And I love finding those hidden gems where someone's poured their heart and soul into some project and illustrated some aspect of history that I've never heard before.
I got you. Well, if you like that, I've got a great one to recommend to you. It's called 99% Invisible. The host, Roman Mars, has a big following. They do a new show every week on a really, really particular niche topic. They just go really deep. One episode spent 35 minutes on what they call hero props in movies that are like famous props you might have seen and the story behind those and everything that goes into crafting them and selecting them and just selecting the right thing. Hero props. And another one spent like 45 minutes on clams in the New York City harbor and how it used to be a big industry and now it's no longer, and the reasons behind that. So just every episode's a different topic and dives deep into things that really affect our everyday lives or not. But
so why did the clam market collapse in New York?
Like anything else, overfishing.
Okay.
Or over clamming. I don't know the term. But yeah.
Yeah. Are you fishing if you're clamming, or are you clamming if you're clamming? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, you're the official writer, so you'll have to decide.
I haven't written about that, but it was fun.
I want to ask you. We'll come back to podcasts, but I've been dying to ask you about independent wrestling. Okay, first off, I get it because it's super intriguing. But what is intriguing about it to you specifically?
Well, I grew up a wrestling fan, like a lot of people, watching Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper, Ric Flair, and all those guys cut outstanding promos. And then in the last 15 years or so, in a rush to commoditize wrestling to the nth degree, the WWE bought out, their major competition, WCW and ECW, and it became such a mass market product. I didn't end up liking it anymore. Kind of like that old Aesop's Fables about how you can't please everybody, Yeah. So the big product, I watched a couple WrestleManias the last 15 years, and some of the stuff I enjoy, but it's just too bloated, and that's it. It's just too big, and they try to do everything to everybody. But independent wrestling has better action and fast-paced storytelling, and every independent wrestling show you go to, unless it's a really, really local place, like I don't know, but if it's not a wrestling town, but if it is, like, say, Philadelphia or Rahway, New Jersey, most of those places, all the independent wrestling shows are like fan conventions at the same time. Like, most of the time, the wrestlers aren't hiding behind a curtain before and after their matches. They're out there interacting with the fans when the show is not going on, before and after the show.
I like it.
Autograph signings. Yeah, it's just and you just feel more connected with them than ever before. And there's and there's like journalists and photographers and promoters for other wrestling shows there. And it's more fan oriented. I guess that's the same reason I like serial fiction. Like I said, it's more fan and community oriented, like the feedback from the fans directly feeds in to the product that you get. And as a, for pure entertainment for more adult audience, it's better. And they do really, really outlandish things that the crowd just loves it. Like at the small show I was at called House of Hardcore, Philadelphia, 2 weeks ago, just only holds about 500 to probably about 500 fans total, but they're just chanting and jeering the whole time, and there's not a bad seat in the house. And anyway, it's great. I love it.
Do wrestlers that have fallen out of favor, or just like maybe they never quite made it in the WCW, or WWE? Sorry, WWE. Do they ever move down to the independent ranks and try to rebrand themselves as a baby face or a heel, and then work their way back up?
Oh, sure. I saw the Rock and Roll Express in Philadelphia a year ago. Yeah, I was a fan favorite of mine when I was a kid 25 years ago. They're still going at it with their same style, but the promoters, often try to give them easier matches or mix them in with a younger partner as a way to, soften their, not to embarrass them essentially, but a lot of people that aren't on WWE, go to the smaller organizations. Well, everything's smaller, or like the biggest story this year in independent wrestling was called All In Chicago. The biggest names in independent wrestling, Cody Rhodes of the famous Dusty Rhodes wrestling family, started that, along with a guy called Kenny Omega, considered the best wrestler in the whole world right now, and a tag team called the Young Bucks. And it outdrew most WWE pay-per-views this year. It sold out whatever the arena was in Chicago with, I think, 1 million people or something. I can't remember.
Are you kidding me? Wow.
No.
I had no idea.
Wrestling pay-per-view. Yeah, look it up. All in Chicago. It was huge. And basically there's New Japan and Ring of Honor, it's called, and a couple other ones. Mm-hmm. Sort of form like an ad hoc AAA, if you will.
Okay.
Like the baseball term.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they allow and each one of them allows like people to come over. So it's not like the old days where WWE would pretend that the WCW wrestlers didn't exist. You'd see all this crossover appeal, and you get the opportunity for dream matches that just didn't happen.
Right.
Years ago, Hulk Hogan didn't wrestle Ric Flair in his prime. It was both till, it wasn't until both of them were, off their peaks that we got to see them together. So there's the opportunity for that as well.
No, you're right. You're making a great point. I remember being a kid in like 85 or so, and totally into WWF wrestling. But I knew that NWA existed, but I'm a California kid, and it was more of just wasn't popular in my region, right? So we went on vacation in Florida, and we would go to all these little touristy trinket shops. And I figured out that they had wrestling magazines there, like NWA with it's all like the Legion of Doom and, like Animal and Hawk and all like just the different tag teams that were available. Ric Flair for sure. And, it was like those, they were just, really poor quality magazines with like the newspaper kind of paper in the middle of them and, black and white pictures. But I ate it up. I wanted everything, because they back then the NWA was a lot more blood and gore. There was like all the cutting and stuff. And there was an article. I remember reading an article. Greg Valentine was talking about how he would, do the pre-show razor slit in his forehead and put Vaseline over it so that he'd open up and, they'd have like barbed wire matches and all that kind of stuff. And I was just mystified by that whole brand as opposed to, and I still love WWF wrestling, but it was just like these guys are really putting on a great show. And I've always enjoyed always enjoyed that aspect of it. And you're right. There's something to the slick product of the WWE that isn't as good as that Florida dirty, dangerous kind of wrestling that they had back then. So has the independent stuff kind of taken over those storylines?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Each organization has its own storyline, and they just carry it over from, the characters do, and they just carry it over from one federation to the next, and then yeah. Sorry, and I was going to get into this. There's some of them are more violent. Like I can't remember the name, but there's one in New Jersey that they, all these guys use, like you said, the barbed wire and the glass breaking and all that stuff.
Yeah,
extra. But anyway, I'm sorry. I think I got lost in your question.
Well, you probably got lost in my descriptions of those wonderful wrestling magazines and bad uniforms. Who were your guys back in the old days, and who were the ones that you really wanted to see on TV?
Ricky Steamboat and Sting.
Sure. Ricky Steamboat was great. So, finishing move, if you were to be a wrestler, what would be your thing?
The cross-face crippler.
The cross-face crippler. I like it.
That was the old move from, I think, Chris Benoit. Which kind of ties into your old CTE thing from earlier. I feel. Because that guy. Yeah. Hilarious. That would be a great story for a podcast, and I hope they do that actually.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's come up with the podcast idea then, based on wrestling. What would that idea be then? Would it be focused on the tragedy and the comedy, or how would you want to structure that?
You'd first look at like the draw, the excitement of being a professional wrestler, why they want to do that, and then the injuries they do to their body, and then it kind of like a real sport. The trainers or the promoters, whoever, don't want to hear that they're injured. They just want them to go out and perform. So they ignore a lot of injuries, and they don't have great health care. And, and if they get dropped, they're sort of on their own.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. And then, explore. Yeah. So some of the stuff behind the, and the trauma and dealing with life on the road, there's just a lot to that. And obviously the WWE, the current product now, as they're getting better and better at protecting their employees and paying them more so they can, hopefully take care of themselves better. But yeah. So that's what I'd like to see. So it'd be interesting, and it probably would kind of mirror the Aaron Hernandez story. But
no, that's cool. I wanted to I wanted to bring Phil in to ask a question because I haven't really made space for him. So, Phil, what do you got for us?
Hey, Joshua. Nice to meet you. So this whole brain trauma discussion is a little close to home for me. I was a former college football player, and currently I suffer I'm suffering some ramifications for playing college football, but I cannot imagine going through the trauma that these, not even just professional athletes, but even these wrestlers that they're going through. And like you're saying, could just be dropped once they get injured, right? With no, what do they do beyond that? And I like the whole idea of a story around, the Benoit story, I think would be perfect. And I'm not sure if it would be a direct correlation to the Aaron Hernandez story or not, but I think the whole idea around brain trauma and the trade-offs that people make at a young age, it's not even just brain trauma. It's the choices that you make to progress your career, whether it's steroids or not really understanding that your body, you may not be able to walk in 10 years after you're done, things like that. Do you see that sort of thing? And the whole independent wrestling side, I think, is probably even less sophisticated. So you probably have people that are even more willing to advance themselves by doing things that are probably not good for their future health. Do you see those sort of things in your experience in following that sport?
Yeah, there's a guy named Vic Delicious that I'm friends with. You guys have to check him out online. He's sort of a bigger guy, but he's I don't know, about 285 or something. But he's just more than willing to throw himself on the top rope and do backflips onto people, which would be unusual for a character like that in the larger organizations. And he shattered his leg last year, and 2 weeks ago, he announced he's retiring, although that could be a wrestling storyline. But I saw him, I talked to him backstage, and he was walking with a cane, and I was like, man, I guess you're not doing any run-ins today.
Yeah.
But but he was already talking online about some other business ventures he was going to with his wife. So yeah, and he's probably only about 33. So if his career's over already, and he doesn't have a big income from independent wrestling, I'm not sure what exactly the guys make at that level, but it's certainly not what they make on the big TV programs. Right.
Yeah, and just the it may not even be a monetary reward for Vic at that point, where it just may be the recognition that he gets, the followers he gets through social media channels and things like that. That may be what may be driving his decisions to take those risks. But I think that the challenge for those athletes when they're younger, it sounds like Vic is near the end of his potential as a wrestler. You really don't see those trade-offs when you're in your 20s, and you just see that you see your end goal. Your end goal is to have those likes or those follows, or maybe the money, and get recognized. But at 33 to 40, now you're starting to like, man, it's hard for me to get out of bed, or I can't remember my phone number, or the trade-offs start to become a little bit more of a reality. And he may not know it yet, but in 5 years, the impact from those trade-offs may be even more, a daily, the importance of those trade-offs may show up on a daily basis for him as he gets older. So I think in my experience, as I've interacted with former NFL players and things like that can barely walk now, you don't realize those trade-offs and those sacrifices that you're making. You just see the dollar signs or the fame, and that may cloud your vision. So I'm not super familiar with the independent wrestling scene, but it seems to me that like you were saying, the dollars aren't even there. So you're sacrificing your health for things that may or may not be worth the trade-off.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. It's well, like I said, since it's much more of a community, I mean, it's almost like they're doing it to impress their friends almost. I mean, this drives everybody to bigger risks. Let's see who can top this. I think it's something like that.
Yeah, who ends up being the caretaker of the brand, of the league, and like who's the caretaker of the brand for the league? I mean, someone must be the promoter and organizer. Are they out there? I mean, is this because these guys got to be so close? Are they looking out for one another? Like, hey, really, the on fire, top of the cage jump. The last time you got hurt, let's just not even put that into the show. Is there someone who helps out in the independent leagues to keep their friends safe-ish? Put on a good show, but
Well, listen, I can't speak for most of them. Obviously, I mentioned House of Hardcore. I'll mention it again. I'm a big fan. I've been to about eight of their shows. That's run by Tommy Dreamer, former big name for ECW and WWE in the early 2000s. And yeah, he's personally involved with all those guys. He runs a training camp out there. Him and Bubba Ray Dudley, another big name from years past. And he looks after all those guys. And he actually just started a new podcast called the House of Hardcore podcast. I can't remember the exact title, but he talked about the trade-offs you make with fame. He said when he's at home, he's just Tommy, whatever his last name is. He has a different last name than Dreamer, he said, with his kids. And then he steps outside the door, he's Tommy Dreamer, and he gives up his private life, and that's just the way it has to be. And but he's very involved with his wrestlers, and a lot of them, when I weren't able to perform, or I talked to them afterwards about why their match was so short, and they were like, man, we were both hurt, so that's why they would only go like 8 minutes or something.
Right. Yeah, what about podcasts? So in your experience in writing about them and looking and enjoying them, how are podcasters who were formerly not in any way known, how do they seem to handle the newfound fame when their show breaks out and get, because ultimately what you want is a successful show, but what that means is that your show likely has gone way past your control to manage it, and you have to have other people in your lives who you don't know. And have you experienced any of the people talking about the drawbacks of actually having a hit podcast?
Hey, this is Jon Leon Guerrero, co-host of the Break It Down show and fellow producer here at Lions Rock Productions. And I'm proud to announce our newest show. It's called Justice. Season 1 is going to be a deep dive into some of the cases I personally worked on as a licensed private investigator, and you'll get a unique view into the criminal justice system that may just challenge some of your personal notions about how it should work and open your eyes in ways you never imagined. So keep your ears open for Justice, a brand new podcast coming in January from Lions Rock Productions to iTunes, Stitcher, and wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Have you experienced any of the people talking about the drawbacks of actually having a hit podcast?
Well, I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people with hit podcasts, and a lot of people that their shows have been moderately successful, but I haven't heard so much of the drawbacks. I mean, although I do see this. I see on Twitter Aaron Mahnke, the creator of Lore. His show came out of nowhere to be a massive success, and he did it all on his own terms. And he's got 3 books. Lore, by the way, is if you don't know, is a podcast about historical circumstances dealing with people's perceptions of like ghosts or diseases, and it weaves it into a compelling tale. Yeah, so he's got 3 different books about that, and it got turned into a series on, I believe, Showtime.
Yeah, that's great.
And he's really active on Twitter, which is amazing for the work he puts in, because he does the whole thing almost is by himself, and it's a massive, I hate to say empire, but lucrative business right now. And he gets into a lot of backlash with his fans, and so I guess the big thing he's trying to learn is how to pull back and not to respond to everybody who criticizes him or whatever. So that's one of the big things. You get a lot of negative comments on anything you say as innocuous as you might think it is. So that's I guess that's the main thing I would take away.
It's interesting to me, this whole world of, it's almost like these long form stories migrating to podcasts are replacing the need for audiobooks in some cases. And so it looks like Aaron may be bringing his novels to this long form story format on podcast. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Well, the novels came out of podcasts essentially. He did I think he did a radio show originally, and then he just turned it into a podcast. And the books are longer form stories of what he reads on air.
Right. And so is it him reading the story, or is it more like those old radio programs of old where you have actors acting out the story?
Oh, the podcast is just him reading the story, and he, he's kind of like an old storyteller in the sense that he weaves in a lot of metaphor and comparison, and has a lot of grand sweeping gestures that really gets the point across. Like, we're not so much different than they were back then in our fear of the unknown, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But the Showtime series, it does reenactments with actors. Yeah.
So one of the most common questions I get, because I advise people on podcasts and how to get theirs going and everything, is how do you monetize, right? And the standard model that we know is the radio model. We're like, well, yeah, you get advertisers. But that really isn't yes, there are podcasts that make money with advertisers, but that isn't the norm. What would you say is the norm for most people who, I want to do this, I've got this great idea, but they don't have an audience? Maybe their friend Ted from accounting will listen, and, their cousin in New Orleans will listen, but how does someone really get to a path towards some kind of revenue when they make a podcast?
You got to get as niche as possible and really build off that. Like, when I started writing about podcasts, I'd get a lot of people to reach out to me and, beg me to write about their shows, and I'd listen to them and just offer them the suggestion to get more specific. Like, I heard this one girl, she just had a podcast where she just talked about books, and her and her co-hosts were interesting, but it wasn't anything too specific to get people excited about, because, a lot of people talk about books, I said, but maybe if you talked about pirate books or something, something specific. So you really got to get it's hard. You have to be niche, but it also has to be a broad niche to be able to attract a bigger audience.
I imagine there's some timing involved too, right? Like, pirates were a thing, but they're not as much of a thing as they used to be back, when Pirates of the Caribbean first became a blockbuster movie. It was like, yeah, everything's pirates. Pirate Day was a big thing, but there's always the next big thing, and trying to stay in front of that has got to be a big piece of the puzzle. At least I think so.
Did you say Pirate Day was a thing?
Well,
you mean it's still not a thing?
I enjoy Pirate Day, but I remember like people actually got excited and would talk like a pirate because it's funny,
That sounded like past tense, and I'm like, no, man, Pirate Day's still a thing.
It's still happening. Yeah. So you would say get niche and build an audience. That's the best way to get to revenue.
Well, I'd say at the beginning, and then and since it is so community based, try to interact with other people who do podcasts similar to yours and that genre, like if it's storytelling or audio fiction or whatever. Because I see a lot of people give laudits to other podcasts similar to theirs. Like there was just the Audioverse Awards. That was an online awards for best audio fiction of the year, and most of those top podcasts, would talk about the other podcasts at the same time. And then, of course, like anything else these days, there's conventions, and that's another way to get exposed to a larger audience as well.
That's cool. Yeah, you're right. The convention thing, you're totally right. Like each of these elements adds in extra things. What do you think? Is it more important to put out really high quality content, or is it more important to put out like a higher quantity? I mean, Joe Rogan puts out 15 hours of podcasting at least every week. Obviously he's got a big audience and everything, but he's not striving for a high production value like Rose Drive is a guy from my hometown. He's got this great podcast, and it's it's an audio drama, and there's a lot of production value in it, but it takes months to put a season together.
Wait, were you talking to him? I just got turned on to that by another guy this last week. I've been listening to that thing nonstop. Rose Drive.
Yeah, Rose Drive's awesome. It's done by it's done by a guy from our hometown. We've had him on the show a couple of times, and Raul's he's good people. I can connect you if you want to talk to him.
Maybe I think his agent or his PR company actually reached out to me right before you did. That's how I was listening to it.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, no, it's a hell of a show. I mean, he puts a lot of value. So what's your sense, or does it matter? Like Joe Rogan's show is not high quality in terms of. There's nothing wrong with it, but you wouldn't say it's like what Rose Drive is with all the audio touches and everything. What do you think? What's your sense?
Well, people like Joe Rogan, and then a lot of the other sports podcasts and the wrestling podcasts that are really long form as well. That's all people with a built-in audience. You just can't go talking for, an hour and a half, 3 hours on a topic without a built-in audience right away.
Right.
You gotta have a hook. But I mean, hey, start with a shorter podcast, 15 or 20 minutes, I think. It's, the Mike Pesca, one of my favorite podcasters for Slate, he does the Gist podcast, if you guys have heard of it. So a little bit of pop culture, a little bit of entertainment, a little bit of news, and he wraps it all up in 20 minutes. I've interviewed him twice, and the main thing he says he's focused on, because he's a New Yorker, is not wasting people's time. But he's such a funny guy.
Yeah. Well, that's very New York right there, going fast.
In the world of podcasts, I mean, I'm trying to think of back when I started listening to podcasts, but it's been, say, 10 years, and the growth seems to be exponential year over year in the number of podcasts. And it reminds me a lot of the early days of mobile apps, where there were thousands of mobile apps in the marketplace that people are trying to get you to download onto your phone and use. And I feel like podcasts are in that similar vein. And what you're doing, it reminds me a lot of those app reviewing sites that you would write about these apps, and you're in a position to promote the strong podcasts. Do you get podcasts reaching out to you as part of their PR vehicles now, since you have a venue where you can shine a light on and feature podcasts and draw attention to them, where the discovery of these creative podcasts may not, the people may not stumble across them as easy as like you mentioned, like Joe Rogan has a built-in audience. Those folks that are trying to bring their artistry through podcast and storytelling, do you find them coming to you as part of that their PR rollout for their podcast?
Well, I've long been on the fringes of the entertainment industry. Living in New York, I was an actor and a writer, so got a lot of friends who do comedy, singing, anything in entertainment, and a lot of them have shows, and a lot of them have pitched me directly, and then sure, I get a lot of emails from PR agents of all kinds, asking me to take a listen to their show, and I only have so much time, and I never know. I never know if it's polite or not to respond to PR people who blindly email me. I never know. So, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. Only so much time.
Right, and it's almost to the point where there's so much noise. How do you get the cream of the crop to pop up on the podcast, as a top podcast, and even for you to figure out who you want to write about? Like, how do you stumble across the next big podcast if, for example, their PR engines, or they're not reaching out to you directly, like the podcast you just mentioned that one of Pete's buddies is doing? Like, how do you stumble across that, just through word of mouth, or how do you find that next big podcast that you're going to write about?
Well, as a writer, I follow a lot of other writers on Twitter, and writers are where shows come from. So a lot of them talk about their next projects. That's actually how I found out early about one of my favorite new shows this year called Arden. It's a murder mystery old Hollywood podcast over, I think, 10 or 11 parts. And it's just hilarious, and it's as good as any Hollywood production out there, with fake commercials, twists, professional voice actors, and everything. And I only knew about it because I was friends with one of the writers on Twitter, and I think she wrote a good piece for Vox or some other website. So,
How do you spell Arden so people can find that show?
Arden.
Okay, Arden. Okay.
Yeah, Arden. I just love that show. So funny, well written, and it deals with a realistic subject matter, a disappearance of a Hollywood actress, in a humorous way, but at the same time dealing with the gravity of the situation, which is a difficult balance to maintain, and they did that really well.
On December 25th, 2007, Julie Capson vanished. Unravel the mystery on Arden. Yeah, you guys can find them at Arden Pod. That's awesome. I love all of these things. There's so many gems. Like you think about what it takes to put one of these shows together, and there's just a lot of work. And so someone willing to work that hard to put their at time their life's passion into this thing. There's going to be great things out there where maybe they just have that one shot, maybe just that one story, but something like this, I'm already hooked. I already want to listen to it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, awesome. And I think more people find out about these shows more when more big advertisers like GE, promote more of them. Like
right.
About 2 years back, GE did a big podcast partnership with one of my friends on a show called The Message. The Message. It was a sci-fi show by GE, and on their website, advertising pitchfork went back into GE's roots as old radio sci-fi dramas.
Sure, yeah.
New age, and Wondery is a big platform, with all their. But yeah, it'll only get bigger and be easier for people to find out when more money gets put into it. Like Arden was completely self-funded by the main writer, Todd Vanderwerf's, I think the editor of Vox, I want to say. But yeah, completely self-funded. So
yeah,
we'll see. When more money gets put into it, more people will find out about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Are there a lot of other podcasts like The Message that are co-produced and brought to you by people like GE Podcast Theater? I mean, I'd never heard of GE Podcast Theater, but if you have large corporations that are creating a vehicle to fund these more creative podcast endeavors, I think that's fantastic. Are there more entities like GE Podcast Theater that have this corporate backing, or do you see that most of them are independent and self-supported, like the Arden Podcast, where it looks like they're using Patreon subscribers to help fund their efforts?
Corporate sponsorship right now is still mostly limited to advertising. Yeah, there have been a few others. I can't remember who the big ones were, but I feel like it'd be easy for, like, say, Comedy Central or ESPN to get behind a podcast series if they haven't already. So I'm hoping we'll start to see, some more venues like that with, more like an established brand, or like the Sci-Fi Channel. That would be a natural fit too, So, and then just promote it, cross-platform on their TV channel as well.
Yeah, I believe that every TV show from any kind of network should have an accompanying podcast to just give more content. People that love your show, they want another hour a week, give it to them.
That's another thing. Like if The Office had a podcast on NBC at the time, if you could hear like Jim Halpert's private,
totally,
private thing, everybody would love that. They could, So I'm sure we'll start to see more of that. At least I hope we will. Yeah,
there's whole Facebook groups of people that love a particular show, and even as it's on the edge of cancellation, they're bonkers about it. Give them more. They want it, and it's cheaper than making an entire week, or hell, a season of 13 episodes or whatever. It's a lot less expensive. Hey, so here's one more question for you, Joshua. What's one podcast that's coming up that you're really excited about that hasn't been released yet?
It's called the Ron Burgundy Podcast. I'm really glad you asked. Basically, it's going to be Anchorman 3 as a podcast. It's co-produced by iHeartRadio and Funny or Die. All we know is that it's a serial drama
So with a lot of characters you may have heard before and some new ones, and they're not saying anything about it. I don't even know if it's produced by Adam McKay or what's going on, but Will Ferrell is solidly behind it, so I'm sure that's going to be hilarious. And it says coming early 2019. That's all we know so far.
That is fantastic. Well, listen, again, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate what you do out there kind of navigating the podcast world. And it was silly, but it was really fun talking about independent wrestling. We used to get into huge battles in my apartment in Sacramento and just wrestle the crap out of each other for hours working on our moves just in case we got the big call. So it was a lot of fun talking to you, man, and hopefully you can come back on and talk about your project that you're working on once you're ready to do it.
Yeah, look forward to that.